faith, but for me, it was impossible to turn away from what I held most dear. While living with the Armstrongs, my every material need was met, and I was warmly included in the social life of Dublin. But I was discouraged from practicing my Catholic faith. This did not stop me, however, from reading, studying, and praying in hopes of drawing closer to God. Surely God did not forget me during these years, because when I was in my 20s, I was introduced to William and Catherine Callahan. Mr. Callahan was a Protestant and Mrs. Callahan a Quaker, but both set their affection on me, inviting me to live with them at their new estate, Coolock. Together, we became a true family, despite our religious differences. During these happy years, the Callahans provided me with the use of a carriage to help the poor in the local parish, supplying food and religious instruction to those without. But even with these good works, I felt compelled to do more. Knowing my heart, the Callahans kindly entrusted to me a small lodge on the grounds where I taught girls to read, pray and sew. I was so grateful for their support and found true satisfaction caring for the children who found their way to our door. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. As the years passed, Mrs. Callahan grew ill, and I was her constant companion. Together we read scripture for its comfort, and I slept nearby should she need me. Having been assigned the management of Coolock, I learned from our servants of a young woman being harassed by the master of the house that employed her. To my frustration, I could find no refuge for her, and began to consider what would be needed to help servants in similar distress. Having been treated as a true daughter, it was a painful loss when Mrs. Callahan died. And not long after, Mr. Callahan's health also failed. He was concerned I had shown no interest in marriage proposals and asked what I intended to do after his death. I assured him all would be well. My plan was to rent rooms and support a few poor women and children, providing shelter and education so they might live independently. It was only after the reading of his will that I understood how much more I might be able to do for the poor. Despite relatives who expected to be his heirs, he bequeathed to me his entire estate and the dear house that had been my home for nearly 20 years. Thanks to William Callahan's loving kindness, I had been left an inheritance worth nearly 5 million today. It was a true fortune. And now, 44 years old, I understood that it was my responsibility to use these resources as my Heavenly Father intended, to alleviate the suffering of many. Despite the loss of my adopted parents, I was by no means alone at Coolock. I was now raising 4 orphaned children as my own, and I was also teaching others in need in the parish school on Abbey Street. But as the months slipped by, I began to envision a ministry centered around a large home where compassionate women might change the lives of other women with no power or prospects of their own. As is true in every generation, there was significant opposition to new ideas. My brother thought it foolish to squander my inheritance building a home for the poor and wanted me to marry instead, while Dublin's wealthy complained openly that my new ministry would ruin their fashionable neighbourhood. And among Catholics, there was confusion about how women might live a life of service without joining a religious order. I did have a few champions, however, including one of my spiritual mentors, Father Edward Armstrong. He kindly encouraged me and gave much-needed advice as I went about quietly challenging the conventions of my day.
Well, my lady, we finished the ground floor. Next week we'll move into the upper floor.
The house would also provide shelter to working women, like the servant I had not known how to help so many years before. There was much I needed to learn, and while construction was underway, I studied the methods used for teaching large groups of different ages. Education had been key to my ability to seize this moment, and would now be the key to helping children escape a life of poverty. While I prepared myself, God was preparing others.
Hello, and thank you so
A
much.
young woman named Anna Marie Doyle sought me out to inquire about the work, and my dear cousin, Catherine Byrne, joined her to open the house on September 24th, 1827. Every day I travelled back and forth from Baggot Street to Coolock. So pressing was the need that we opened the school even before the construction was finished.
5 plus 5?
Here we separated the children into groups, teaching them their letters, numbers, and the essentials of their Catholic faith.
16.
9 plus 9?
18.
In only a few months, we had 200 children under our care, most wearing only rags, which we promptly replaced. It continues to amaze me that God commenced such a great work with only 2. Volunteers began to stream in, as the House of Mercy was a new opportunity for both Catholic and Protestant women. Here they could enjoy a season of service without a lifelong commitment to a convent. The famous Daniel O'Connell sent his 2 nieces to be instructors and carved the turkey for the children at our Christmas dinner. A year later, our attention now turned to the care of the sick, as illness made entire families all the more vulnerable to disaster. I sought permission for us to visit the poor at local hospitals, where the head physicians agreed we could come as often as we liked.
Morning, ladies. Welcome to St. Patrick's. Thank you. I hope you all travelled.
Together, we drew up a visiting schedule to minister to the sick. And we also sought out those suffering alone in destitute conditions, offering compassion and care. The work was flourishing, as were the children now being clothed and taught. But the need was already outstripping resources.
The letter, especially signed by her.
Father Armstrong suggested appealing to the wealthy Dubliners living on Baggot Street, and even arranged for the appeal to be signed by Archbishop Murray.
It's all there. Now, Catherine. The Lord works in mysterious ways. I knew it. I knew.
Opposition to our new endeavour was growing in unexpected places, however. Some Catholic clergy were concerned the women living in the House of Mercy were not a religious order, and feared we would erode support for Catholic sisters throughout the city.
And we'll keep on working. We'll stay here and help these people.
In the midst of this storm, my dear Father Armstrong prepared to take his leave of this world. But he left me with a most important counsel: to not place my confidence in any man, but in God alone. And he was right.
Catherine, Father Kelly.
Father
Catherine
Armstrong's
McAuley.
successor was a priest who took an immediate dislike to both me and the rapidly growing ministry on Baggot Street. He tried to forbid the public to use our chapel, cutting off the donations we received from Mass, and he insisted my house be turned over to the Sisters of Charity to be administered as he saw fit.
Closed. All the nonsense that's been going on here, it's over. I'm giving it to my sisters. It's gone.
Despite his choler, he was a controlling man, determined to stomp out what God had begun. By the time Archbishop Murray intervened, it was painfully clear that my new idea to serve the poor as laywomen faced too much criticism to overcome. If the ministry was to endure, we must become a religious order, and the House of Mercy a convent.
It is the only way.
It was not an easy decision, especially as it required me to begin a grueling 15-month training at the age of 52.
But I was comforted by this. The new order would be distinct and not cloistered as so many others of the day. Our desire to teach, nurse, and care for the poor personally would be welcomed by the Church. Though difficult, God had made a way for us and for the work.
On the 12th of December, 1831, Anna Marie Doyle, Elizabeth Harley and I completed our novitiate with the Presentation Sisters at George's Hill, taking our vows as the first Sisters of Mercy. How wonderful it was to finally return to our house, to see the loving faces we had missed so much. And though I never imagined myself as a sister, I did experience a deep joy submitting to God's purpose for me, as did all the women called to the order. Soon after, the Sisters of Mercy volunteered to help the city respond to a devastating outbreak of cholera. At its peak, 600 people were dying a day. At the Townsend Street depot, the sick and dying were comforted by the physical and spiritual care offered by our sisters. This was the start of the order's reputation as religious women who excelled in the care of the sick. Though my life as a foundress did not start until I was in my mid-50s, God granted us rapid growth. We became known as the Walking Sisters because we went out to those in need. The new order attracted women with many different God-given talents, from art to cookery. And many were nurtured into formidable leaders, developing the same skills in sisters that came after.
Over 6 years, the Sisters on Baggot Street built and opened 10 new convents.
The first was in Kingstown, a half-hour away by steam engine in Dublin. The second was in Tullamore, 8 hours away by canal boat. Each year, we sent out more young sisters to help build and care for communities, covering the beautiful rolling hills and plains of Ireland. And despite the constant worry about resources, the calls for help continued to flood in, including the young women who sought protection and shelter in the House of Mercy. As Sisters of Mercy, we experienced what Paul described in the scriptures as our joy and crown. By serving the poor, we drew down on ourselves the mercy and grace of our Lord.
It was a difficult but extraordinary life.
Establishing new foundations had always reinvigorated me. But when preparing our convent in Birmingham, I had a cough that would give me no rest. And even as I rejoiced over the young women called to serve another new community, I suspected my life might be drawing to a close. I ended up being cared for by my own sisters in the infirmary here on Baggot Street. Word spread quickly as I weakened, and loving letters flew between us. On my last day, I added the name of every living Sister of Mercy to my will. These women were my true heirs, and to them I entrusted the House of Mercy and the spirit of the order. As evening fell, sisters continued to arrive from our other convents to say farewell. I asked that they gather around me, wearing their white cloaks and holding candles, so that together we might celebrate Mass one last time. God kindly gave me strength to encourage each of them.
Do not be afraid.
And with my last words, I gave Sister Teresa final instructions. Following my death, she was to gather all the sisters together in the community room to comfort one another and share a good cup of tea. To my amazement, God has seen fit to continue this humble work far beyond my years, and the order has endured for nearly 2 centuries. My vision had been for lay people to take up the work of caring for those in need. And today, the ministry is so much more. A fruitful collaboration between the Sisters of Mercy and hundreds of thousands of lay women and men. We serve together. The works of mercy now wrap around the world like a cloak, and the house we built still stands, welcoming thousands of people each year who find inspiration in our sisters and one another.
It was my hope to live for the greater glory of God. And this is my prayer for you as well. Know this: blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. And as I often said to my sisters, may we all meet in heaven.